There is a new movement about, and this movement is designed to make sure that people are, well, quite frankly, having civil conversations with one another. As a matter of fact, it's called the Builders Movement. And the mission is to equip citizens to overcome toxic polarization and solve our toughest problems together. And so, in learning about builders, I really wanted to find out much more about how they're doing what they're doing and how things are going. So joining me is Tori Larned. She is a spokesperson for Builders. Tori, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Eddie, I'm so happy to be here. I'm doing really well today. Even better that we're talking. I'm excited to dig into this with you.
So I have got to find out, how did this thing even start? I mean, I can only imagine how it started, but what exactly is Builders and what was the inspiration for the movement?
It's a great question. Builders is on a mission to overcome this us versus them mindset that's dividing our country or inhibiting us from solving problems together and creating the tools for people to solve problems. Yes, conversation is important. Having civil conversation and constructive conversation is a great baseline for being able to solve problems. And so we give people the tools through social media and through the news and a newsletter. We create the tools to teach people how to think versus what to think. A lot of what we're fed today is very divisive and tries to put us into a side, whether it's on social media and the algorithms that create an echo chamber of people who think a lot like us, but don't give us the other side, right? And the same thing, in national news media today, we're getting a lot of this us versus them, left versus right, and we're not getting solutions oriented outcomes, right? We're just further combating each other. And so we're creating the tools to help people think more constructively and flexibly and come to the table to find real solutions that are going to help their community, whether you're on the left, you're on the right, or anywhere in between. We think it's all of us versus those who want to divide us. So it's not left, it's not right, it's everyone who wants to solve problems versus those who want to divide us. And we think there's a lot more people who want to solve problems in this country than who want to see us, fail and who want to, push their very aggressive, divisive agendas.
So, in doing all of that, as you point out, we are in a pretty volatile environment right now, and in really trying to help people find common ground in some way. And I love this approach of teaching people how to think as opposed to what to think. I really want to come back to that, but in taking a look at the environment right now, how does that happen, especially considering how volatile things are?
It's one first and foremost, it's not an easy environment that we're in right now. The environment that has been created by, whether it's again media, hyper partisan politicians, special interests, or even foreign actors, they profit or they gain off of our division. So there's a lot of forces working against us to not want to solve problems. But the good news is the reality is that the majority of us do want to solve problems. We all have this underlying common ground that we want to expose here at Builder. So step one for us is showing people where this common ground exists across our differences, across issues, education, healthcare, guns, whatever the issue is, there's a lot more common ground than what meets the eye or what's being fed to us today. Because again, the powers at play don't profit from solutions, they profit from division. So that's step one, show people that we have common ground. We did a study not too long ago that showed that 9 out of 10 Americans have common values. These are things like respecting the rule of law, holding leaders and each other accountable, respect and compassion, very, foundational American values. But the problem was that when we asked what they thought about the other side, they said only three in 10 of people thought the other side believed these things. So there's this gap in perception. Most of us share these values, but we don't think the other side, whatever, that other side is, shares that value. So we need to bridge that gap. And we do that through creating our own media and disrupting these forces. So we have a media arm of our organization that's going out into communities across America, talking to people every day to help them think outside of their own, beliefs or ecosystem and start to break down some of these barriers to understanding. And so that's how we start showing people the reality that we can get along with people and we can find solutions with people who are different than us, or we can even start at a baseline of having these constructive conversations with people who are different than us. And then from there, we're listening to our community and we're taking that feedback and we're creating tools and programs to then help activate them in their communities to, whatever the issue is, giving them the tools to go solve it more productively. Because at the end of the day, what we realize is that, everyone wakes up in the morning and has the same goals. We want to get to work on time. We want to take care of our kids. We want to do what's best for our lives and our families. And so we want to create tools that help them do all those everyday things and engage in democracy at the same time so that they don't feel left out of the equation.
It seems that one of the contributing factors from where I sit, especially as someone who has been in radio for a long time and I hear the conversations that happen, it seems like one of the contributing factors is that for some people, you have to almost pry their ideology from their cold dead hands, and they're thinking, well, no, if this is the party I belong to, I have to think this way, and I must, otherwise I'm betraying everything that I believe. How do you get someone who, and I'll use an example. How do you get that really dedicated conservative and that really dedicated progressive to have a conversation? I mean, is it catching them both saying, well, yeah, I want to be safe and I really want our kids at schools to be safe. And then you say, okay, stop. Since we both want that thing, how do we walk toward the middle? Do you find that's how it happens a lot of times? You can just catch them in that one moment from both sides and then just walk them toward the middle.
I think you're on a really good track there. It's understanding what the common goal is first, right? We get stuck on big wedge issues as the only solutions to our issues, right?
Okay.
And because of that, people think if we don't do X, we don't even want to touch any other solution to that issue because we're going to hold firm. This is the answer to everything.
So
And
wait, so wait a minute. So what would be an example of a big wedge issue?
a great question. I'll give an example of gun rights and safety because that will
Okay.
eventually lead us to some of our work that we've done to prove your point. We convene citizens we have a program called Citizen Solutions, which brings people from across the political spectrum or the ideological spectrum together to solve a pressing issue in their community. We launched this program in Tennessee following the Covenant School shooting there in Nashville. At the time, of course, after shootings of this magnitude that capture the nation's attention, the same calls for change come about, right? Permitting, restricting gun access, etc. And that's not to say that those things or those causes aren't important. They are. But what happens is that's where the conversation stops. And so what we did and what you saw in, even in the Tennessee legislature was they convened a special session after this shooting to address public safety in the state. And if you go look back at the news, you'll see that it was chaotic. Three members got expelled, and there was
Yep.
this friction in Tennessee over these issues. So instead, we convened 11 people across the spectrum. This was everyone from every part of the state and diverse lived experiences, from a firearms instructor in rural East Tennessee who's a self-proclaimed Second Amendment absolutist to a teacher in Jackson, Tennessee, that it has lost multiple students to daily gun violence in her community. And pretty much everyone ranging, we tried to be as representative as possible of lived experiences on this issue in the state. And we brought them together for 3 days and we challenged them with building trust with one another. These are people who would never otherwise share a room with each other for the most part, right? So we brought them together and we said, get to know one another, build that trust between each other and start talking about solutions. And what you saw was this transformation. These people got to know each other's real stories because it's not as black and white as it seems, right? Everyone's experiences are so nuanced. It's not just, I'm on the right and I'm pro gun and I'm on the left and I want, gun restrictions. That's the picture that we see in America, we think in America, but that's not the reality. Everyone's beliefs are very nuanced on these issues. And so when they started talking to each other, they were able to find creative ways or that common ground to build upon, right? And so, for example, as everyone started talking, one of the solutions that they came up with was, how about we provide gun issue literary resources to schools in our communities, right? How do we teach kids about guns so that they're safer around, and the consequences of guns so that they're safer around them? And what happened was they took that proposal and many others that they created 8. They were all uploaded online for all Tennesseans across the state to weigh in on them, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure every person who's a part of these problem-solving programs can see themselves in the proposals. 30,000 Tennesseans weighed in, supported 5 of them, including, gun education in schools, and brought them to their lawmakers. That 11 group presented them to lawmakers, and one of them, the gun education in schools, has passed into law. So we brought people together. They were able to get past what media and what the online world is telling them about each other, and they found common ground solutions that work for them. Another one was temporarily removing a firearm from someone who's at risk of harming themselves or others. And that one, if you tend to be conservative, it's also, looped in with red flag laws and things like that. And that's a trigger word. Red flag law doesn't really mean anything. It's a very politicized word. And so what this group did was, the pro self, the Second Amendment absolutists and, the pro safety people, they created this high threshold for removal, and they created all these criteria to say, this is something that we all can get behind, that we think is best for all of our communities. And so I think that proves what you asked me of, how do you actually put this into action and get past these sticking points, is you break down those barriers that are trying to keep us apart and get people in community together and illuminate that common ground that exists.
So I'm just wildly curious. The people who were able to work together to push this forward, do you know whether or not they've all maintained some kind of relationship with one another or not?
They are we're communicating with them, they're communicating with each other. And these aren't just people in their same camps. They've written op-eds together on their work. We created a documentary about them that we hope to make public to the masses, hopefully later this year or early next. But they will tell you that their lives have changed through this experience, and that they would have never otherwise shared a room with these individuals. The person from Appalachia grew up there, and that's the experience he knows. He doesn't know what happened in Memphis and Jackson, and he wouldn't have without exposing himself to other stories and other perspectives. And now he takes those perspectives with him everywhere, and vice versa. We had at the time, a high school student who was about to go to college. She lost her best friend in high school to gun violence. And she goes to school in Texas now, and she takes her story. She's in all these leadership organizations. And she talks about the guy from rural Tennessee who's her bestie, So they are in constant communication, but not only that, they're using each other's stories and bringing them to their own communities to show what happens when you open yourself up to different beliefs beyond your own camp.
You're listening to The Way Forward. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Tori Larned, and she is a spokesperson for the Builders Movement. And the Builders Movement is designed to do exactly what it says it's doing. That is bringing people together, build bridges with one another. And, you know, as I'm listening to that story, or as I was listening to that story, I started to wonder about what are some of the common personality traits that you might have noticed? I mean, so if you think in terms of, say, the big five model of personality, you know, it would seem to me that you have to identify people who are willing to be open. They're willing to be agreeable. They're willing to have some sense of conscientiousness with one another. You know, they have to have some form of extroversion so that they can be willing to talk to one another. Has there been any kind of observation or maybe even some sort of light research that Builders has done to identify the kinds of people, the kinds of traits that are most likely to help people work together by any chance?
Yeah, we have developed what we call, or how we define a builder is someone who is a flexible thinker and a constructive problem solver who recognizes the dignity in all people. And they reject dehumanization, and they reject name calling, and they reject this zero sum, like my way or the highway thinking. Um, and that's how we define someone who the the characteristics we hope to grow and bring to society is those builder characteristics. And I think a lot of people have them, and it takes practice. Your listeners could be sitting here going, oh, I think I'm that. But I encourage everyone to take those qualities with them to every conversation, especially with those who they disagree with, and say, am I really, thinking flexibly here? Because it's hard. Sometimes you will just not agree. And if you think, but that's the thing, I think we've gotten so used to not challenging ourselves to have tough conversations because we live in this online world where, oh, I can comment something in the comment section, or if I don't like them, I can unfollow them, or,
I can
I don't
block.
have to, I can block. I do not have to
Yeah.
interact with people who think differently or who I disagree with. And that is not how society functions, right? And so we need to get used to discomfort again in our society where we're challenging ourselves to hear something we may not want to hear. It doesn't mean we ever have to agree with it. And one thing Builders is we're not necessarily asking people to meet in the middle either. We fully believe that people can wear their beliefs, on their shoulders and bring those beliefs to a conversation and see what transpires as long as you're thinking with an open mind and with compassion and a little curiosity. I think it's going to do wonders for how you kind of develop as a person and get back to creating a society that you want to live into. But everyone, it's not just pointing fingers. Oh, I think that side has to do it. That person has to do it. It's like, you have to do it every day. I've worked here 3 years, and I still catch myself in moments of conversation all the time being like, I don't think that was very builderly of me. That I did not practice the builder's mindset here because it is hard, right? It is hard to put your beliefs aside or to even, show compassion for someone that you think is like, that thinking is out of left field. So that's kind of where I would start in terms of the qualities that we look for: flexible thinking, constructive problem solving, and really importantly, respecting the dignity of all people.
Yeah. And so the mention I'm thinking of on that one is adjustment. People have to be willing to adjust. But to your point, it is really hard to solve a problem when you get really emotional. And all it takes is for one person to say that one thing, and then you have to figure out how to manage it, and that is so difficult. That is very difficult. So let's talk about, you mentioned media a couple of times and what we tend to hear. And I have to tell you honestly, Tori, there are times, I work in media, and there are times I am embarrassed by what I see coming from the national level in media sometimes, which is why I do this show. You know, I really am trying to figure out the way forward a lot of times. And so with people being that dissatisfied, because I just see so many people comment on how dissatisfied they are with media. And that's from both sides or from various sides, I should say, from the ideological spectrum. And so how does Builders help people cut through that noise a lot of times, getting away from the so-called opinion shows and that sort of thing, and getting away from that sort of thing? What does Builders do to facilitate that?
That's a really great and important question. And before I answer it, I want to acknowledge something that you said that led into this question, which was the fact that, you know, some people might tune out or shut off after a conversation or not understand how to deal with it. And what I want to reiterate is that it's not always just one conversation, and you don't have to necessarily, like, you have to still, you can push your comfort, but you don't have to put yourself in a position that's going to hurt yourself either. And so we, you know, it's up to those individuals to figure out what that balance is in protecting themselves while trying to push the bounds of their, you know, their open-mindedness and trying to see new perspectives. And it doesn't always, and most of the time it does not or will never happen in the first conversation. If you go into a conversation seeking to win or to prove a point, you've already lost, right? And I
Yeah.
think people hear it over and over again, but they have to, like, that's if I told people to say one thing before they went into a conversation, it was like, go in to understand and to listen. I'm not here to win something, you know? And so taking that with them will make those conversations continually easier. And so that's that. In terms of media, I too am former media. I was a broadcast journalist for about 5 years, and I have so much respect for this industry. The accountability media provides is so important, and the transparency it provides is so important. And today's world, it's also super polarizing, right? And there are, I think, outlets out there that recognize that they profit from division and from polarization, and they lean into that. And there's others who really make a concerted effort to show up in an unbiased way to provide factual information to individuals. And so I think if people are feeling exhausted, maybe I would say just do a news refresh. Figure out what sources you feel like are being fair and honest and giving you multiple perspectives, and making sure you're getting all sides, right? So if you think this one's kind of, you know, giving you one perspective, go find that outlet that's giving you the other perspective and read everything in between, because that's what's going to help you make real informed decisions about that. And I tend to find that's more digital media than
Yeah.
broadcast media today and the
Yeah.
national level. I also think ingesting and taking in local media. Local media is dying, but that is where trust is built, right? Is listening to your local news stories and seeing what's happening in your own community. That's going to help you build trust and understanding, and that's going to trickle up to the higher levels, because you're going to see how it's playing out in your local community. So when you hear it nationally, you kind of have a little bit of that context too. So I think reviving somehow, some way, you know, going back to reading your local stories online, listening to local radio shows, like my friend Eddie's here, is going to be a great way to rebuild that trust and kind of fight that news exhaustion. And then really what Builders does is, again, we create content to help people understand how to take this all in and how to think about the issues of today. And so if you think you need some more of those, and we evaluate news of the day and try to give a little bit more perspective to it. And so if you think you need some more of those skills and that understanding of how to, you know, understand, you know, with a more flexible and constructive mindset, follow our newsletter, follow us on social media, and you're going to get, I think, a little bit more context for what's happening in the world in a more constructive way. And so people can do that at buildersmovement.org. Um,
Excellent. You just led me into the next question. And so so that's one way people can get involved with builders, and we are definitely going to make sure that people are reminded of how to do that. But for someone who individually, they're about to go into this, I don't know, they're about to go to work or they're about to go somewhere and they know they're going to be talking to that person who is opposed to their views. How can they thoughtfully have that conversation with that person so that they are their own builder?
We have something, we lead by what's called the 4 C's: curiosity, compassion, courage, and creativity. And so, curiosity, I would take those 4 C's into a conversation. Curiosity means going into it with an open mind to learn more, not with an agenda, but to learn and seek new perspectives, right? Compassion is to go into it showing compassion for that person's lived experiences and the differences that they share from you, and try to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, right? And then courage is uh, being willing to have tough conversations and to even admit when you think your perspective has changed, or to welcome new ideas. It's not easy to say, oh, maybe I do agree with that, but being open to that is going to be important. And that leads you all to the fourth: creativity. Through finding common ground, you're going to find creative avenues to that you agree upon, and maybe that'll help you chart a more productive path forward. More tangible things like take that conversation on a walk. Exercise is scientifically proven to, reduce friction in conversations. So take that conversation on a walk, take the 4 C's with you. And I think that'll be a great start. And again, we have a lot of blogs online that, examine how to show up in community and relationships. And so maybe just before you go in, get prepared and go read them and see if that's helpful to you. And then of course, if you want to ever, if your audience is leaders in your community or individuals and you want to be more engaged with builders, when you sign up, there's you can provide more information on how you want to get involved, whether you want to bring some of these skills to your universities or to your communities as a leader. Message us, and we love to see how we can help all communities across America chart a better path forward.
And one more time, Tori, give us or give us that web address so that people can find out more about the builders movement.
You got it. buildersmovement.org.
All right. Tori Larned, she is a spokesperson for the builders movement. Thank you so much for joining me on the way forward.
Thank you, Eddie. It was so awesome to be here. Appreciate you.